Some years ago, I was listening to the radio to a session of Focus on the Family for Dr. James Dobson, and he was interviewing scientists, Christian scientists, about the rapidly converging crisis. Now, this was interesting because this was a non-Adventist station, but I was interested in finding out what kind of evidence that they would consider, they would reveal. They looked at the economic trends. Now, someday I might be able to have everything on a projection that I can show you. But they studied how the world economics is rapidly complicating at a global scale. North America, this 30 years ago, this I personally heard when I came in as a child from the mission field. 30 years ago, the federal chairman of the Federal Reserve mentioned that in North America, we owned 50% of our assets, and 50% was foreign debt. In other words, we were breaking even. We were not bankrupt, but neither did we have any assets. It was 50-50. And he said that if we took the right decisions, if we made the right decisions and tightened our belt in the United States, that we would be able to survive the problem and strengthen. But if we did not, he said, in 30 years we will pay the price. Next year he came on and he said the U.S. politicians, the senators and the congressmen, as well as the presidency, was unwilling to pay the political price of tightening our belt. In other words, it would not be popular to say we're going to be living in a recession for the next 20 or 30 years. So they did not. And he said, at this point, he said, we're going to continue to get in debt until finally, in about 30 years, we will own nothing. Well, 36 years later, last year, I heard another announcement. The announcement was the United States owns 2% of the assets and 98% debt. Now, tell me, with 2%, how can you even pay the interest on the 98%? Is it possible? No. You do not have enough income to even pay the interest on what you owe. So what does that mean? That means that there will be interest on the interest, which rapidly means you will own nothing. Now what happens when you don't own anything? You're a slave. You're a slave to other people. They own you. They tell you what to do. They make the decisions. Now, Larry Burkett, from the Christian ministry on finances, on Christian financial concerns, he wrote the following, the coming economic earthquake. And in that book, he says the following. He says that the last thing that a government will do right before a financial total collapse is they will try to save the economy a little longer by printing as much money as they need to. In other words, I don't have any money coming in from taxes sufficient to pay my bills, but governments can do things that individuals cannot do. Governments have the right to print money. If you printed money, you go to jail. Right? But if the government prints money, you don't go to jail. And so, he said that is the last event to happen before the great collapse. And last year, the United States government, Congress voted two things. They voted to monetize the debt, which means print the money necessary to pay the debt. And they voted to not publish how much money they were printing, because normally it is an international standard that all countries publish those figures so that everybody knows what the dollar is worth. But the United States wanted to print so much money, they didn't want anybody knowing what the dollar was worth. So, for the first time in modern history, the United States is no longer printing the M3 figures, which tells the world how much money they are printing. And so it wasn't a surprise to me when the president of the country came on and said, this year was a very good year. We were able to pay for the war. We were able to pay the interest on our debt. And we even brought our debt down. Our deficit was lowest this year than any other year in the modern times. You tell me how that happened. There was plenty of money to pay. You understand? Billions of dollars of money have been printed to pay on the debt, on the interest, and to finance the war. But what happens when you print money? Remember, monies are just like checks, right? It's really not, a paper is not worth anything. It's only worth something because the government says it's worth something. And how much is it worth? It's worth according to what the government says it has to be in gold. So, as he prints more money, the value of the dollar decreases proportionally. So if he prints $1 trillion, and if there's $1 trillion out there floating around, that means each dollar is worth half as much. Now normally the value would decrease proportionally, but since nobody knows how much they're printing, nobody knows what the dollar's worth. This kind of experiment has already happened in Argentina, and in 1 year it caused 36% inflation. 3,600% inflation. It went down, the value went down by 36 times. So, how much is the US dollar worth today? Nobody knows. But it's worth a lot less than it was last year. And it's worth a lot less than what you're paying for it now. What will it be worth next year? A lot less than it is this year. One of these days, there's going to be a little problem, and the balloon is going to pop. And when that happens, the whole economy will be pulled out totally. And those that have savings, those that have been saving up retirement, those that have their retirement funds in special amounts, the dollar itself will be worth nothing. So people who know anything, that if they're not religious, if they don't have spiritual backing, if they know what's happening, they don't keep their money in dollars, they keep it in gold. President Bush doesn't have his money in dollars, I'll tell you that. He has his money in gold. And when the economy crashes, those that are holding true assets, like precious metals, they can convert them back into the new currency and they can buy things with them. Now, we as Seventh-day Adventists aren't so much concerned about our retirement. Because if you understand that Jesus is coming soon, then you understand you're not retiring. And even if you are retiring, your permanent life is not here on this earth. Some of you are already retirement age that are here. But some of you might have savings. Some of you might be planning on doing it. As we look at the different trends, as we understand the nearness of time, as we understand that money is worth something a little bit longer, but not for very much longer, we will prioritize the way we spend our money. We'll look at it differently. So what's happening on the economic scale? We are already on the point where it's escalating, and very, very soon, it cannot last very much longer. Very, very soon, there's going to be a terrible economic disaster. And if the United States goes down, it's taking most countries with it. It's like a big ship that goes down. All the side ships tend to be pulled into the wake. So North America, as an economic giant, is about ready. It owns nothing anymore. It is already in total economic bankruptcy. And then when it goes down, it's going to take the world with it. Okay? So just understand that crisis is already. And when I heard this radio program some years ago, they were not even discussing it. It hadn't happened yet. They just knew that the line was going vertical. Well, we already are vertical. We're just waiting for the explosion to happen. It could happen tomorrow. It could happen any day. But God in His mercy is still keeping the window open a little bit longer. It probably can't happen another, 2 to 3 or 4 or 5 years. You can't keep this up forever. It's only been a year old since we did this experiment. And you can't, it's like going to the bank and saying, or coming home, honey, guess what? We don't owe anything to anybody anymore. I've decided not to pay our debts. Oh, that's nice. Freedom, finally. How long will you have that kind of freedom? Until the bank takes everything you have. Right? You might have a couple days of peace, right? I'm not paying anybody anymore. I've decided, forget the world. Let the world do what it wants to, but I'm free. Yeah? You're free until you go to prison. And that's what happens to all nations. An individual cannot get away with it, neither can nations. So on the economic side, we have international disaster about ready to happen. Any time now, we're probably looking at 1 to 2 or 3 or 4 years before total financial collapse of the United States. But, it could be 5, it could be 6, but it is a factor that is happening right in our lifetime in a very near future. You combine it with the economies of other countries that are growing in the opposite direction. China, for example, I went to China, it has no debt. And the difference, just the difference in the balance of trade, it's a hemorrhage in the balance of trade. And then you think that the stock market, $80 billion a year, are